You are about to enter a new world, and you will never view entertainment in the same way again. This is Popcorn Theology.
Welcome, movie lovers and theology nerds, to Popcorn Theology, where we examine films and TV for where they align with the greatest story and our greatest storyteller, discussing what to receive, reject, and redeem for common ground, fruitful conversation, and mindful movie consumption. I'm James.
And I'm Miles.
And welcome back to our special series on Daredevil, Born Again. We wanted to cover this series as it releases, discuss the themes, and provide some quick rounds of reject, receive, and redeem. And for this special series, there is no spoiler-free section, so we're going to get into spoilers immediately. So with that said, Miles, why don't you give us a plot summary on what happens in episode 7?
All right, episode 7, titled Art for Art's Sake. So following the events from the previous episode, Daredevil has rescued Angela, which is Hector's niece, White Tiger's niece, from the mysterious villain Muse. And this really speeds all the plot points up. So you have Daredevil comes back home after beating up Muse, and there's Heather in his apartment, and they confess their love for one another, which is an ominous sign. It's like, no, don't do that. One of you is going to die. And then there's the hunt for Muse just launches, because Daredevil goes, okay, now that he knows that we know where he was hiding out, he's going to get desperate. And so you have Daredevil following Muse. Then you have Detective Kim, the police officer from the heist episode. She's following Muse. And then along with Fisk and his task force, they're all coming after Muse. In the midst of all this, Fisk learns that, well, Daredevil's back. And if you remember from episode 1 where they had that I'll be watching you kind of conversation with one another. If you turn back to your ways, I'll be there. If you turn back to your ways, I'll be there. Well, now we've hit that point after 6 episodes.
Yeah.
And we see Fisk also empowers. He's got another aide he's pretty ruthless, an assistant named Buck. Yeah, and he'll come back a little bit later in the episode. Then you have Dr. Heather. She's still doing her work, counseling, and this young man, Bastion Cooper, comes in. And lo and behold, she's been counseling the mayor and his wife. She's been going out with Daredevil, and now she's counseling Muse. And so
I think she is the only therapist in MCU New York.
Yeah, but it's a great piece of convenience. You know, that's one of those conceits I'm willing to entertain. But meanwhile, you have Matt is going full bore Daredevil, and he's tracking down Muse, and he's using his Daredevil skills to track him down, and then as Heather is counseling Muse, she figures out who he is. He ties her up, reveals that he's this serial killer, that he's obsessed with her, that she's the only one who's allowed him to express himself, and the city is now seeing his true self as Muse. And then action ensues. Daredevil comes to the rescue. The fight gets real brutal. Heather shoots and kills Muse, and then after that, Fisk gives the credit to bringing in this vigilante, or this mass serial killer. He takes the credit. He gives the credit to his task force. And then the final scenes of the episode, you have Vanessa. It looks like she's betraying Fisk by sending the gangster Victor to go kill him. But Fisk is just eating his dinner, enjoying himself. The gangster comes in to kill Fisk, and there you have Buck. Shoots him from behind a curtain. Turns out their partnership, maybe not their marriage, but their partnership is as solid as ever between. So a lot happened in this episode.
Yeah.
Just a lot of quick pacing. It was kind of refreshing.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed that. So let's go ahead and just give it our popcorn ratings then. What are some things you liked or didn't like, Miles? What were these standout moments for you in this episode?
Well, it was fresh, kind of exciting to see some of these plot points progress all at once. I think it could have been buttered and salted, so I have a little bit of a bad taste because I expected this to be a little bit better. But in terms of satisfying things, it was really cool to see Daredevil is back and he's solving problems. And there was, as far as I could tell in this episode, there was no distracting CGI to take you out of the moment. It felt gritty. When he smashes through the window, that's awesome. But this time, again, some things progressed almost too fast. There were a few episodes that felt too slow. This one is like, so you find out that Bastion is Muse, and then he's dead within, I don't know, 15 minutes. I mean,
Yeah.
The audience knew that this kid was Muse, but in terms of time of his identity being revealed. So
he's like the only ominous person they've introduced in the whole show so far that's not spoken for.
Yeah. And then he's dead pretty quick. Although he seems so supernaturally tough in their previous fight in his base that it seems like I'm not sure he's dead. But this show keeps you guessing on that. I also think that they really missed an opportunity. I love seeing Matt with his extreme senses. It's really cool. But I really wish they had done an agonizing thing where he goes to Muse's hideout, and instead of being able to tell from a painting with his fingers that that's Heather, it should be frustrating that he has all of these abilities, but the one thing he can't do is like read a television screen, read a book. What if it was Heather's book was in Muse's papers, and Matt can't figure out where he's going? How cool would that have been to have the limitation and have him be frustrated with that?
They've had some pretty interesting things. I remember in the Daredevil comics where like he'll go into somebody's apartment or their office, and he'll, somebody's ripped off a Post-it note, but he can feel the letters, like the impression of the pen underneath and things. And like some of that's cool, but yeah, a painting it's not like the painting had, it obviously had some layers because he was doing sort of some abstract brush stuff.
It was blood. Yeah.
Blood, but it wouldn't have had the contours of her face. Yeah. That stretched credulity.
And I like that they tried. They had to flash back to him doing the this is how Daredevil sees your face. That was fine. I just think it was a missed opportunity. And what if it was he can't figure it out? The cops come back in, and it's actually the cops and the detective's investigation that leads him that Heather's in danger. And then what you have is a race between Daredevil and the cops to get there first. And then what I thought would have been really cool, I thought because they were all pursuing Muse together, that you were going to have kind of like a three-way fight at the end of season 3 where you'd have cops and Daredevil and Muse all fighting at the same time. I just thought they were setting up for something much more interesting than it eventually came.
Yeah, they actually could have had Detective Kim there.
Yeah.
And he's got senses that are so heightened. He could be like outside after they had already come in, and he could be listening as she says, "Wait, that's that woman who's got the book out. That's what's her name?" And somebody else, they could have worked out it was Heather Glenn, and he could have heard that, and that actually would have tied in Detective Kim a little more because she seemed like she's just sort of shoehorned into a scene here and there for no reason. It would have added a little more to that. I don't know.
Yeah. So I'm not too upset with the episode. I thought it was going to be really interesting, and it was just pretty cool in my opinion. What about you? How'd you feel about this one?
I mean, I'm going to go fresh, but again, it's this qualified fresh that I have to give all of these episodes. I do want to first and foremost compliment. I don't know if we've talked about this yet, but I think it's probably the editing, the editor and the director of some of these episodes. But I know there have been different directors for episodes. And something I see very consistent that's just been wonderful. There's a great scene in this where they flash back to Daredevil at the scene, and he's all exhausted right at the beginning of this episode. And then it cuts to almost the same frame, but now it's Matt in the shower.
Yeah.
I've loved the way they've sort of, whoever's done this season, the way they cut between things. Almost, Simon Pegg, what's his name? Does all the Simon Pegg movies.
That's going to kill us.
Edgar Wright, thank you. Edgar Wright, he has a precise way of editing and cutting from scene to scene that was really artistic. And whoever's working on this, like there's a lot of that happening. In previous episodes where we had the back and forth fights, like the juxtaposed Fisk Matt fights and different things. There's just some
cool.
Beautiful sequencing of framing a shot and then framing multiple scenes and splicing them together so you've got this back and forth or transition. So some beautiful stuff there. So there's some good work in this show. But I would say this episode, I'm most happy about it and think it's fresh because I'd call the episode Daredevil for Daredevil's sake. It's like, we got him finally.
Yeah.
And I love seeing him going through his paces, but it still feels like it's going through the paces of a pasted together narrative that's obviously been reworked, Maybe
Yeah.
if I didn't know that, I just think I might just call it bad writing, but we know this had a lot of things shot and then they had people come in and retool it. It feels like that. And certain things, just as you said, felt rushed. In fact, like some poor writing aspects. Why would you say, I know they put in, oh, he was trained in Taekwondo. Well, that would make sense then because he's taking on Daredevil and kind of holding his own, especially in the previous fight. But they say he only had 3 months. Like, I've taken like a year and a half of karate, and I could not go toe to toe with Daredevil. I mean, like, I don't like 3 months. You could have written anything in there. You could have said they put me with this instructor in my house for 3 years,
or since I was 3. You don't try that.
Oh my
Go
gosh.
with that.
And then finally, then as a teen, he kills him or whatever. But 3 months. Like, seriously? And I'm not even sure exactly how. Like, they could have had some good writing to have him explain more. You said this. This is why it inspired me. I felt like you had the implication that some things had happened. I wasn't even. Catherine, my wife, was a little confused. She's like, "This feels, on the one hand, the way they introduced the scene, like it's their first session.
Yeah,
it really shouldn't be their first session because it's like, is this their first one or continuing? I don't even know from the story. I feel like Heather, sadly, and Cherry and Kirsten, they all feel kind of like shells of characters. Mostly Cherry and Kirsten. They feel like the show got retooled. So if there was any scenes developing their characters, it feels like it's been left on the cutting room floor. So I'm supposed to believe he has this interaction. But honestly, when Matt talks about how sometimes his life here now feels fake, it's like, yeah, the show kind of feels hollow in some areas like that. It kind of feels fake, Matt. I kind of agree with you from an artistic perspective. I feel like the show, like the opener in the show, where it's Daredevil coming together out of all this rubble. I feel like that's sadly a metaphor for what actually happened behind the scenes. It's like it's taking this whole season for Daredevil to actually get born again. So maybe we get a better season. I've heard that the next 2 episodes are the only ones fully written by the new showrunner and Benson and Moorhead, like the 3 kind of main collaborator folks.
Okay.
So I'm hoping we're going to see these last 2 give us the quality that we can be looking for in a season 2. I'm willing to hang in there again. Daredevil for Daredevil's sake.
Yeah.
Charlie Cox, Vincent D'Onofrio. D'Onofrio again. There's a moment where he fakes this smile, and he's trying to smile, and it looks so alien.
Yeah.
It's just this beautiful moment. And Vincent D'Onofrio is a great actor, and he's a very charming and winsome kind of guy. He smiles a lot actually off screen in interviews, but to then act in such a way where I'm smiling, but this is the fakest smile you've ever seen, and it looks foreign and awkward on my face. It's just those guys elevate this material every week.
There's just pieces of greatness. That's almost why some of the things that feel kind of like filler or fake stand out, because there's these moments where you're like, yes, this is the show that I've loved for 10 years.
Yeah. And there are some things this episode maybe didn't have a lot. In some ways, I felt like it had some of the most holes and short changes to characters like Muse. But on the other hand, it feels like we're getting closer to the way this show ought to be. So in some ways, it was almost my favorite episode, while at the same time having as many flaws as maybe some of the most flawed episodes so far. So weird juxtaposition for me.
Yeah, I think kind of speaking of juxtaposition, I'm often fascinated with how many movies do I know of that I really like that don't have really a lot of theological depth. So where we would say buttered and salted, but diluted. There's very few of those. Because typically that's one of the reasons why I love movies. But this was an episode that felt kind of like that, where I was like, I'm enjoying myself. It has drama, it has action, but it didn't really say too much about what was going on in this specific episode. So I'm gonna give it a diluted in terms of the theological soda. True. Not super deep. I didn't have much to receive, reject, or redeem, and I had to kind of dig.
Yeah, it's kind of the problem, I think, of doing episode by episode, especially when a series does have an ongoing storyline. It's cultivating things we've already talked about, and so how much more they add to talk about in each episode, I'm not sure there always is, or that there always needs to be, especially when you've got a show that has an overarching storyline. Sometimes there are just going to be very action-packed interludes, or things like the bank heist was like, that's okay, as long as we're moving somewhere eventually, we more to talk to. But there's a couple conversations in here I think we can discuss, right?
Yeah, like I found it interesting at the the fallout of a really action-packed, kind of chaotic episode, at least chaotic in terms of what our characters were dealing with. How does Fisk react to all of it? Well, he takes credit for the heroics of Daredevil and Heather, really. So at the end of the episode, he says, well, basically it's, the police, you guys saved the day this time.
So that guy's holding up the mask.
He's holding up the mask, holding up the trophy that was really won by Daredevil.
Yeah.
And like, that's a wonderful piece of villainy. Or Heather, really, because Daredevil wouldn't kill him.
Yeah.
And so, and he's you can see him moving all the pieces where you go, okay, he's going to say, look at this. I have saved you from this masked murderer. I'm going to save you from all of the masks now. It's time to go after Daredevil. You're like, that's great. And they actually eased into that really well. I'm excited about Daredevil being chased down by a bunch of well-equipped, crazy cops. That's going to be great whenever that happens. and
especially if they all have Punisher symbols and he recruits somebody to help him. We'll see.
That would be great. So with this, just trying to dig for biblical parallels, this reminds me of when Paul is telling off the false apostles in the book of 2 Corinthians. In 2 Corinthians 11, he has false apostles who are coming in and twisting doctrine. In particular, they seem to be greedy. They are after glory, status, and money from the Corinthians. And Paul is laying out he's like, no, I'm here to give you Christ. And he says this in chapter 11, verses 13, 15. He says, for such men are false apostles, deceitful workmen, disguising themselves as apostles of Christ. And no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. So it is no surprise if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness. Their end will correspond to their deeds.
Ouch.
So in an episode where we're about to talk about masks and deception, Fisk is a really good picture of the devil again here, where he is masquerading as an angel of light, as the civil servant, and he's talking about, Daredevil took down my operation outside of the rule of law, and he's masking himself as an angel of light.
Yeah.
And you see, man, it's a really good picture of evil. Good job. And then I like at the end of what Paul says here, their end will correspond to their deeds. This is what we hope for when we watch Daredevil, that they are going to get their comeuppance, and it's going to happen, and Daredevil is going to deliver it, ironically dressed as the devil. God's going to sort it out in the end. And that's really cool for me. That was, I think, one of the good discussions, I think, to be had here.
Yeah.
And then what seems like the showrunners were trying to communicate in this episode, plus discussions of the previous episode, is this theme of masks.
Sure.
And that's an obvious thing for people to bring up in a show about superheroes. But you see these lines from Heather when previously on, you have a clip of her saying, I've been thinking a lot about projected personas or masks. And I went back to the previous episode because she had this discussion with Matt where she says, what about a mask? Does it hide us and give us permission to do the things that are legally and socially taboo, like violence? I mean, does a mask allow us to be our true selves, or does it strip away our identity to allow us to act like animals? And so that discussion seems to be carried forward here. And Matt goes, maybe both. I actually shared this line with a random member of our church who came by. She's like, what are you doing with Batman mask? I said, well, we're going to be talking about masks. But one thing that's frustrating to me with these discussions in Daredevil is that they miss the themes of masks in like a movie that I really love, Batman Begins. He explains quite simply why a good person might wear a mask. One, as a symbol, because anybody could be Batman, anybody could be a hero and protect the city. And two, to protect the people that you care about. And those are kind of not in this discussion. But what she does bring up is really interesting psychological discussion. And I think that this idea of masks, both kind of letting out your sin and masking your insecurities, seems to pull the discussion forward in interesting ways. It also made me think about, man, can I think of any times in which masks literally or metaphorically are found in the Bible? And it seems like sometimes, especially in the Old Testament, Book of Judges type situations, God is okay with using deception or masking in judgment of evil. So, for example, at one point, God permits an evil spirit to be give lying words to prophets in in Israel because he's about to judge them because they have continually fallen away from him. You also have the really fun story of Ehud, the left-handed Benjaminite who stabs Eglon.
That's right. Love that story.
Yeah, Jabba the Hutt of the Bible, the big fat evil king.
Yeah.
And he comes in and he's like, I'm not strapped on one side, but he's left-handed. And then he comes into the king and says, I have a message from God for you. And his message is sword right to the gut.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, I think Jesus's commentary on masks, this is me stretching a little bit, but in John 3, Jesus has some pretty hard words. It says this, and this is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and people loved darkness rather than light because their works were evil. For everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come into the light, lest his work should be exposed. But whoever does what is true comes to the light, so that it may be clearly seen that his works have been carried out in God. And so in general, the wicked will cover their faces and hide themselves, and the righteous will come into the light because they don't have much to hide. Now, I think that it would be fun to see the father and the priest and Matt discuss this passage at some point.
Yeah. Well, and you discussed, in Batman Begins, and Spider-Man would say that too, a lot of superhero fare.
Yeah.
Like we wear the masks to protect the people we care about. But I think something, as we talk about receive, reject, redeem, just watching the scene with Heather and as he's lying about his bruises, as he's lying about what he's been doing.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that there are times when that mask is unacceptable to the people that you truly not just care about. Like I get the idea of hiding it from people who it might hurt, but you can't hide it from someone who, granted, they're not married. But here we have in this episode, they're sharing a living space together. They are professing love for one another.
Mm-hmm.
Like so they're not married, but they're living together in a love relationship. Like there's no sustainable relationship to be had there. Like you even see in the comics too. Like before Superman marries Lois Lane, he reveals the identity. You can't have a committed love relationship, and obviously then marriage would be the ultimate covenant. But of course, in things like shows like this, they've got the order out of place, right? They're already being one flesh. They're already saying, I love you. Like this, like marriage should have preceded those things. So now they're into those things, which makes his mask unacceptable, really, in my view.
Yeah.
You can't be lying to the one who's supposed to be your helper suitable or the one that you are one with, even though as a Catholic, he should know that he's doing it out of sequence here and thus sinfully. But yeah, he's sort of a lapsed Catholic.
That's a good point to reject, but you really do show that's a good point here of why is the truth and the total vulnerability in marriage an important thing, because you are sharing both your strengths and your weaknesses. You become one. And so when Matt is playing the world's game in terms of marriage of, okay, I'm going to share a life with you, but I'm not going to share my whole self with you.
No.
That's a mask that's maybe trying to be self-protection. That's an unjustified mask. Whereas maybe wearing his mask to go fight Fisk. Well, I mean, Fisk knows who he is now, but to go fight any other bad guys might be justified in order to protect somebody. But and
even Spider-Man in the comics, right? When he marries Mary Jane, but she gets to know he's Spider-Man first. So there's a threshold where if someone is truly your ally in life, i.e. a spouse, i.e. like there's certain people that I don't think you could do that, which that presents all sorts of challenges for a Christian, right? What about a Christian that works for the government and maybe there's secret, we literally have secret agents, right? So there are certain professions that it would be really challenging for Christians to face in terms of, okay, wait, I'm going to have to hide secrets from my spouse. Like how do you play those cards and have that conversation together, or at least have the conversation together before you start doing it?
Yeah.
I say, because there are people who hold military secrets or even can't tell their spouse where they're going. Like that's a complicated life. The person would at least have to accept that you have a secret life.
Yeah.
Versus being lured into a deep relationship and only finding out after you've had some form of covenant. Although again, no covenant here, but it's a reject thing for the Christian to think about for sure.
Yeah, you already started out with the reject on that. And it's funny,
Yeah.
so often there's unbiblical relationships that I just forget to throw that in there. But almost every movie we watch reject their patterns for relationships, except for, ironically, you'll get to this later. Fisk and Vanessa, in a weird way, in these shows. It's a wonderful thing about their character. But another thing about Fisk, I'd say that we should reject. I don't think the show's promoting his idea, but it's just. I love the scene where Fisk is looking out the window and he's basically retelling the events of Daredevil season 1 in his own words. 10 years of work of business planning. I made blue collar men rich. There were good people with grit on my team. And this man tracked down all my workers. He beat them. He broke them without due process because of his, and he spits the word of his righteousness. It's like, That was a wonderful piece of acting and writing in this show, I think. But it reminded me of, look at the way this guy is reframing all of his evil actions. And it just reminded me of the woes in Scripture. A good example is Isaiah 5:2. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness. That's what he's doing there. And in fact, if there weren't people calling evil good and good evil and light for darkness, you wouldn't need Matt Murdock. But one thing the show has done all throughout, even in this episode, is little Angela saying, "Is anybody going to do anything?" The orphan, the widow, the immigrant, that's the vulnerable person is saying, "Is anybody going to do this?" Is, in the words of Paul from earlier in 2 Corinthians, will their end correspond to their deeds? And that's the tension that actually makes a need for Daredevil. And it's just fun watching Fisk retcon the events of Daredevil season 1.
Yeah.
And then also his hypocrisy in here. It's, you might just, Fisk's pastor might say, well, why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye or in Daredevil's eye when, behold, there's a log in your eye about that whole season 1 thing? He's a hypocrite. He's a great picture of evil, but you should make sure that you don't follow him or swallow the hook.
Maybe it's a bullet in his eye from that previous.
Yeah. Take the bullet out of your eye.
Yeah. It's like, we know that happened. So, okay, I guess that makes sense. He has a bullet in his eye. He can't see it. Oh, but yeah, if we're referencing the previous seasons, Matt kind of does that too when he's talking with Heather, and he's talking about the previous seasons of Daredevil, right? He says, "You realize I used to have this whole other life, and it was a lot different to this. And sometimes to me, this all feels like fake." And it's funny because there's sort of a meta side to that too, as we were talking about at the top. Yeah, like I can look at this season and be like, actually, this feels like lesser Daredevil than those glorious 3 seasons that preceded it. And from an artistic standpoint, that might be true. But I think if we look at actual characters' lives within the narrative, for Matt to be saying that, it's like, well, what's happening? Why isn't he living in the present? In fact, why can't he escape the past? Like Isaiah 43 says, "Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I'm doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I'm making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland." Like, Matt sort of can't forget the former things. He's dwelling on the past in a way that is unhealthy and unhelpful for him to truly commit to the people and things that are around him now. And we could debate whether that's been because he's been holding back from being Daredevil or like where that line is exactly. But he even talks about, Heather's trying to walk him through it. He's like, well, I'm fighting it every day. And she's like, well, it's not a fight. It's not a fight to process your trauma and move on. She said, it's not a fight. It's a process. I was like, what? I felt like that was half true. So that's more of a redeem aspect. And that's something that we could redeem. Like, she's calling him out of just, sort of wallowing in that hurt and pain and letting that trauma build up from his past and trying to walk into what life, or we'd say God, has for him in providence moving forward. But it's also not just a process, right? We don't have to, it's not just us trying to fight our past pain or past or present sin or present temptations. And it's not even a process, although we'd say sanctification is a process. But it's also, like, Matt should also know, it's not on him. It's not on us. Like, we give it to God. Like, we have the better helper than a helper suitable in a wife. We have the Holy Spirit if we have Christ. Like, we have it. It's not even just, it can be a fight and it can be a process, but first and foremost, it's a surrender. And it's a surrender to God.
It's a good little God-shaped hole in his psychology of this show is this guy needs Jesus. He needs somebody to be able to declare forgiven.
Yeah.
And to say, there's hope for the future, and the Spirit will indwell you to empower you to change.
Yeah.
Maybe they're going with this. Maybe it's he still needs to be born again. We'll see. But that's what we would say.
That's what
he still needs to be born again and to deal with this. But I'm always wrestling with, where is the show going to land with, they seem to talk a lot about it's bad to be Daredevil. But there's a lot of times in which I'm saying it's not very bad to be Daredevil in life under the sun, or in this world that's run by the judges where everyone's doing what is right in their own eyes. A hero is needed in this situation. So there's a lot of times where they're guilty over things that I don't think they should really be that guilty over. I understand with him and Foggy in this situation, and this, you see a little bit of it with Heather in this episode, where Matt is in this brutal fight with Muse, and which, if in the previous episode, I thought Muse was supernatural because Daredevil gives him an incredible whooping and he gets back up. I thought he had something weird, like a healing factor or something, and the fight between Daredevil and him is getting really brutal. I mean, Daredevil shoots him with his grappling hook through his shoulder, and he's still coming. And then Heather has a gun, boom, 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 shoots him and kills him.
Yeah.
And there's a scene where she's kind of upset about having to kill him, and I get that on one level, but I don't know if that should be your primary emotion. I think maybe it should be relief that a serial killer who's killed 60 people this year, who was trying to kill you in the moment, and you were reacting in self-defense, the threat is now put down. Now, of course, it'd be better if he was in jail and tried through the system, but it's not really a tragedy that you killed him, in my perspective. Even from my Christian's perspective that sees everybody as possible of redemption, I'm not that sad, Heather. And so I'm going to reject that. I'm a little tired of that part. The don't kill rule, like the Batman rule and stuff, which I love, gets thrown a little farther to be all psychological. The truth is that the don't kill rule is best couched within a Christian worldview that says everybody's made in the image and likeness of God. God is the one who has the power to take life and give it, and that we ought not be ready to do that ourselves. And that really giving that to the state and due process is the best that we can do in a tough life. But Heather, it's okay. You can let yourself off the hook. That dude was trying to kill you. Anyway, that's one of my rejects. And then in terms of receive or redeem, outside of the ones that we've peppered in here, I didn't have anything else that really felt super positive spiritually, except for what you helped me come to in this. So what do you have in terms of a receive or redeem?
I think everybody's pretty mixed and muddled in this episode, but I think there is another redeem, which is, again, it's this weird, I'm going to say the word fidelity. We know there's been infidelity in this story between Vanessa and Fisk, but here we have this moment of fidelity. Now, you likened it to maybe it's their partnership, if not their marriage, but tomato in some ways, right? And so we know infidelity happened. We know, but now it seems as though she is obviously now back and fully committed to him. They wanted to toy with us there a little bit. And I wasn't around for the episode where they really explored that, but I would also posit, by the way, biblically, if a marriage counselor is working with these two that's Christian, what he did was abandonment prior to her infidelity, which doesn't justify her infidelity. But abandonment, biblically, by many a theologian, is abandonment and infidelity are both kind of causes for perhaps divorce and irreconcilable marriages. And so,
in the Old Testament, if it's like if a master marries a slave, which we don't like, but there's some stipulations there where if you don't provide for her financially, if you don't provide children for her, and if you abuse her, she's free to go.
Yeah.
And it's like at the border, like we're often really, really strong on the no divorce in Christian circles, which, believe me, I am. And I'm happy that they are close together, but really he wronged her. And here's another mask in this episode that I didn't realize until just now.
Yeah.
He's masking the fact that he killed her lover.
Is he almost dead or is he dead? I'm not sure if he's
I don't know
dead
if he's dead.
In the basement or whether he's still hanging out there half dead. I'm not sure. Mostly dead?
He half killed her lover at least.
Yeah.
That he has, and that, mine,
Yeah.
And so
if anything,
they're not living in the truth. Yeah.
So it seems as though his side of fidelity is still treating her like a possession, but with the mine reference, we talked about that last week, but then she actually is making a decision to deliver his enemies over to him in an act of fidelity. So there is a weird sort of...
Well, it's submission. It's biblical submission, right?
Yeah.
Submission is not agreement. That's just agreement is agreement. But she actually does seem to genuinely disagree with the way he's doing things. And she submits and is a helper comparable to him.
Yeah.
by being an accessory to murder.
Yeah. Now, let's be clear when we're not talking about this as something we can receive. This is only something that, from one metaphorical aspect, we can redeem as a positive.
People say, I want a Jim and Pam relationship,
I want a Vanessa Fisk relationship. Wait a minute. Oh, well, we've probably exhausted all the time we have for this episode, but I appreciate some time. It's been fun to dance with different hosts as we move through Daredevil. So we'll be back for the next, we've got a couple more episodes to go, hopefully the last one we can have maybe the face of everybody who's contributed up to that show up. So until next time, keep engaging movies and media from a godly perspective. And remember, you are not a mindless consumer.
Thanks for watching this episode of Popcorn Theology. For more content, subscribe on YouTube. Follow and interact on social media to help broaden the conversation. Check out our archive of past episodes at popcorntheology.com or wherever you listen to podcasts, and consider becoming a patron saint by supporting us on Patreon, which lets you interact, influence, and enjoy exclusive bonus content.